We'll move on to Matthew Charles Jones now. As you've heard, Matt is chairing the Totally Renewable Yakandanda Community Energy Group, and he also works with Mondo. I got on to Matt back in 2017 when I was setting up Healesville CoRE, and Matt gave me quite a lot of time and advice, and was really supportive. And as an individual, sort of on my own here in Healesville, setting up Healesville CoRE, it was great to have all of his experience from working in totally renewable Yakandanda. And we even had our first website set up by someone in Yakandanda who had set up the totally renewable Yakandanda website. So it was done for $750, I seem to recall, which was mates rates if there ever were mates rates. But Matt is now working with Mondo, and so he's involved with ideas and developments that are much bigger than what's happening just at a local community level. But he's got a foot in each camp in these bigger developments and bigger ideas, and also in the community, and how these can link. So Matt, I'd like to welcome you very much to our webinar tonight, and would like you to take over the meeting. We're looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Great, thank you very much, Jeff, and thanks very much to Healesville CoRE, and welcome to everyone who's viewing. So, Jeff, can you just give me the nod that my screen is visible, please?
Your screen is visible, and so are you.
Great, okay. So I'm calling in this evening from land owned by or lived on forever by the Yathamatang and the Dudarawa people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and likewise on the land on which you are right now. So this evening I have been invited to talk a little bit about some of the changes that are going on in the electricity market, and my intention is to do two things. One is to speak very generally about some big changes, and there's some trajectories that you'll probably be aware of, but always nice to be reminded. And then secondly, some of the programs and quite remarkable changes that are underway in the Australian energy market. And I think we can be really proud in Victoria. There's 50 community energy groups working on these themes in very creative and locally adapted ways. So I'm planning to trickle through that and look forward to answering any questions as we go. So I work for an organisation called Mondo, which is a commercial subsidiary of AusNet Services, and no doubt you've heard of AusNet. And AusNet own all of the transmission lines in Victoria, and then the distribution lines on the east side of Melbourne. We've also got some gas assets on the west of Melbourne and some other bits and pieces, including some batteries. As Ben and Jeff have both alluded to, I'm the chairperson of Totally Renewable Yakandanda, and have been lucky enough to be involved with that organisation since it launched in 2014. And the goal of Totally Renewable Yakandanda is to transition the town to 100% renewable by the year 2022. So I suppose the problem or the challenge in front of us is really clear. And that challenge is, how do we take our existing heavily focused, centralised fossil fuel generation system and make it one that is much more focused on a different and more modern approach? And one of the things that I'm very mindful of is we've been very well served by the coal-fired industry and what it's done for Australia. And it's been very helpful that in the past, governments around Australia have invested heavily in coal and its generation, and that's allowed a really easy and centralised oversight, which means it's been quite easy to achieve. And by and large, it's very predictable. You put fuel in and you get electricity out at the other end. But of course, as we start to understand the impact of fossil fuels, we've got this real massive conundrum around carbon emissions and particulates and consequent impact on human and nature's health. We've got this ongoing conundrum of fuel costs and impact on landscapes. It also requires large volumes of water in order to be able to cool the towers to continue to work effectively. And on top of all of that, in Australia, we've got a very ageing coal fleet, and half of them are over 30 years old. And in the 2 years leading up to the end of 2019, those fossil fuel generators broke down every 3.2 days. So as much as they're predictable, if they're breaking down, and that's most notably occurring on hot days, it means that they're actually not all that reliable or predictable, and particularly because it happens on those hot days. So conversely, we are entering a whole new era where we've got this capability and future of decentralised generation, and Ben and others have already been alluding to that. It's fantastic because it's low emissions when it's operating, and low impact on human health, notwithstanding some of the concerns that are raised. And regardless of what organisation, research agency or various governments around the world currently keep coming up as the lowest form of new electricity, solar, wind, and in most cases backed up with batteries or storage as well. And as you know, Australia's got this almost unlimited supply of sun. We're regarded the highest lived-in country in the world, or highest irradiance in the world. And for me and for this forum, it's fantastic because it also is possible for all of us to go and invest in some way in renewables and local renewables, and not many of us directly invest in coal. We certainly couldn't go and build one. However, there is some challenges, and again, you will have heard these in the media about the intermittency, that they do come and go. Obviously, it's sunny sometimes and overcast or dark at others. The other challenge of them is that it has proved very difficult to orchestrate them. So how do we change from just a few coal-fired generators to lots and lots and lots of little solar generators or other forms of generation? And then the third point that I've made there, and it's self-evident really, is that it's quite contested, that people have very strong and different views about how to best generate electricity and how to create our next piece of energy future, knowing that we have a scenario where our existing coal fleet needs to be retired. And the big question is, what next? So I won't spend much time on this slide here, but essentially what we are looking at there is a capture of generation that was occurring in order to meet all of the customers across Australia this morning. And I think that that's really interesting, and depending on time of day and time of year and which state, we still in the national energy market depend on about 80% of our electricity supply to come from fossil fuel sources. So if we're wanting to change over our electricity supply, there's a big task. And one of the particular challenges of that task is that depending on which research you're looking at, and for example, the International Energy Agency, they're suggesting we need to have retired all of our coal fleet by the year 2035 if we're going to satisfy the Paris Agreement targets. So there's a big project underway. How do we shift from an 80% dependence on fossil fuels, particularly coal, into some other form of generation? And so I guess that's the thing that I'm talking about now, and we'll continue to delve into. So we've talked really mainly about renewable energy, solar and maybe some batteries. And Ben has referred to the UBI, but there is now not just a focus on renewable energy generation, it's this term distributed energy resources. And simply what that means is, how can we get lots and lots of small and large generation, whether that's solar or wind, and lots of storage, whether that's battery or some other physical storage, and whether that's pumped hydro or hot water or a range of other ways of storing electricity, and the strength of the Internet of Things, along with computers to manage all of that. How do we get all of those factors to work together in a way that replaces our heavy reliance on fossil fuels? And so that's the project. How do we manage demand generation, storage, and the smarts of local recording of energy use and generation to replace fossil fuels? And I've got a few examples there, but you can read those, so I won't go through. One of the really quite remarkable pieces of work going on, and this is mirrored by lots of different organisations around Australia supporting it, is a piece of work that's been worked on for about 4 years, and in other ways before that, delivered by the Australian Energy Market Operator. And they've worked on this integrated system plan. And its focus is very targeted. How do we replace our existing fleet of fossil fuel generation, primarily coal, with all of these distributed energy resources, and noting all of the challenges that I highlighted before with renewable. It's challenge of coordinating lots and lots of small generators and users, the challenge of how we manage that intermittency, that sometimes it's sunny and sometimes it's not. So the Australian Energy Market Operator has written this integrated system plan with lots and lots of different inputs, and they've worked up a number of different scenarios depending on what commitment state and government and business as well want to give to the outcome of transitioning away from fossil fuels. And one of those approaches is step change. What does it really look like if we want to completely transition to clean energy, noting my reference before to the 2035 goal of completely retiring all fossil fuel in Australia? In order to achieve those various scenarios, one of which was step change, they've worked up these 6 different work streams, and in various ways these are happening at a regulatory and a large organisation level, particularly the energy networks, but they're also of relevance for us. And for instance, Mondo has been successful at working with the Australian Energy Market Operators to secure funds from ARENA. And over the next 2 years, Mondo is going to be working with a whole range of people across the northeast, residential and business customers, in order to be able to both build and then trial a market framework that draws together these lots and lots of small users and lots of small energy generators and storers as well. And that market framework will, all things being equal, then transition to not just focused on the northeast of Victoria, but become a nationwide platform to be able to aggregate those small users, small generators, and small storers of electricity so that we can replace the existing fleet of coal. And as you can see from the dot points, that's only one part of it. There's lots of trials going on. universities, the electricity retailers, most notably AGL, are doing a remarkable amount of work with current fleet of 2,000 houses with batteries in South Australia and another 3,000 about to come online. So really quite remarkable and advanced work. And the focus is, how do we deliver clean, reliable and affordable electricity where we depend on renewable energy and factoring them together as distributed energy resources. I won't delve into this slide too much, except so much as to say it will be available to you as a recording afterwards. And I would also say I would really encourage you, if you're interested in this whole national conundrum of transitioning to clean energy, to delve into the Integrated Services Plan, because it's remarkable reading. And one of the things of note is that it's got a timeline of 2040. So but for 20 years, what are the steps that are needed to be able to get to a heavy reliance on renewable energy? And one of the things that's going on at the moment, and you will have seen it in the media, is a really urgent need to be able to boost our capacity to transmit electricity from large areas of generation to large areas of usage, and particularly the capability to do that reliably between states. And it's a big challenge, and a lot of work's underway. And one of the interesting things about that challenge is, how do we get people who haven't necessarily thought a lot about electricity, except that they are paying increasing amounts of money for their electricity, to withstand the change that's required to shift away from these small numbers of monolithic generation and a small number of transmission to a scenario where electricity is being generated and transported in much more visible ways across the Australian landscape. The other thing I wanted to highlight in this slide
Matt, I don't know if you can hear me, but
is the fact that focusing. Can you hear me, Jeff?
yeah, you just froze for a moment, so we couldn't hear you.
So the national energy market focuses on the eastern side of Australia, as you can see there. But I would really encourage you to go and find that document in the Integrated Services Plan and study it and the words that exist around it. So I wanted to make this quite obviously a little bit more directly relevant to your scenario in Healesville. And one of the biggest problems I think we have, and Ben highlighted this, is not that we don't have the technology to generate and share the electricity. It's, how do we shift in our own minds from thinking about electricity that's done to us to a scenario where electricity is something that we're an active participant with, and comfortable that we meet our own needs, but that we're also an active participant in helping other people meet their needs. And one of the big goals of the DER marketplace is to say, if you're helping other people meet their needs, and whether that's a residential home or accommodation or a business, how do I get value back for the service that I've delivered to the network? And the DER marketplace is firmly facing that question, and you will have seen all of the retailers out conducting trials and experiments to say, well, what threshold will people participate in a program to help others or not? And it's really exciting and interesting work, and it's going to evolve and mature a lot in the next little while. But the picture I've captured there is straight from the AMO website and essentially showing the transmission that's coming into Healesville, and in a more focused way, this is off the AusNet Services website. It's a publicly available document, and essentially it's the 22 kilowatt distribution lines are the purple ones, and they're the ones that cart electricity around your streets to get it to the place of need. I won't spend too much time on this because Ben has essentially touched on it, but this is a model that we've worked up with the community of Yackandandah to transition from stage 1, which is a business as usual, stage 2, adding good quality solar systems with UBIs, which has in some instances happened in Healesville. Stage 3 is the addition of a battery to that, knowing that for many the battery is a price point still out of financial reach, but still very justifiable from a point of view of energy resilience, as well as being able to reduce your reliance on a fossil fuel powered grid. Stage 4 is the addition of the retailer, which in the instance of Yackandandah is Indigo Power, and potentially for some of you in Healesville. And stage 5 is the addition of scaled generation and storage. So I'm showing you there a snapshot from somebody's electricity bill, and I'm really very interested in the question of a nanogrid. Essentially, a nanogrid is a single property. In this case, this particular customer, and it's a real person, a real household, added at this point here 7.5 kilowatts of solar up from an existing 2 kilowatts and a battery. And so essentially this person is now using 0.13 kilowatt hours of electricity per day, noting that the average for Victoria is 7.89 kilowatt hours. And the point that I wanted to make is the simplest, easiest, although perhaps expensive way of managing this is to look after your own household or your own business needs. How can I, in my house, add solar and progressively add battery as I can afford to do it? Make sure that I continue to replace appliances with efficient appliances, and that my building envelope is secure, keeps cold air out and or warm air out, depending on time of year. And I think it's really crux. Well, how can I do it? Over a period of time to reduce my reliance on the grid. So that's our nanogrid. It's a single property. Ben has talked a little bit about this question of microgrid, and microgrids are really just a focused use of distributed energy resources. How can we, in a localised way, use solar and battery and smart energy control and playing around with loads in a way to satisfy local network constraints? Microgrids can also be used as a way of adding resilience to the local grid. So if the power goes out, in many instances, a microgrid at a household level can continue to provide power. And in the future, the microgrid can be islanded from the main grid as well. So at the microgrid level, it's really important to have a computer which can record what the household is doing and what the network is doing, and how to get an optimal amount to reduce pressure on the grid, to reduce cost for the household, and to avoid future upgrades to the network, so that cost is then avoided. And then a third approach, and I think of great relevance to all Australian energy customers, is a virtual power plant. And essentially, and people will have different ways of characterising this, the question is this: how can we take away the geographic or common geographic limitation of a microgrid and apply it across either a whole area or a whole portion of Australia. And the seeming and growing solution is to apply virtual power plants. And essentially, that's this question of building lots and lots of renewable generation, lots and lots of storage, and lots of ability to control load, and being really smart about using that equipment in a way that delivers safe and reliable power to consumers, B, returns a benefit and affordable electricity back to the consumers, and C, best leverages the existing assets that are in the national energy market. So I'm talking about the poles and wires, transmission and distribution. So in Yakandanda, our virtual power plant is now up to 3 gigawatt hours, and we're just finalising the savings to the community, and it's not quite yet ready to release, but they're numbers that we're particularly excited about, where we've got really demonstrable savings made right across the community. And I think the thing we need to be excited about is what happens when we start to expand that right across Australia, knowing that that's already happening in lots of places. And just to give you some insight, in Yakandanda, we're sitting at about 60% of properties have rooftop solar. And I think in Healesville, you're sitting at about 30%, but that's changing very quickly. There is another program that I just wanted to bring to your attention very quickly, and that is the launch of a thing called the Local Power Plan. And essentially, what that's doing is helping government at a national level understand the capability of communities that are thinking actively about their potential to become active participants in the future energy supply, and doing so in a way that gives great personal value and great local value. But essentially, the plan is to launch a new organisation called the Local Power Agency, and it will deliver 3 things. One, support for 50 community hubs right across Australia, and those hubs will support groups like Totally Renewable Yak and Healesville CoRE. Secondly, it will help launch mid-scale solar installations. So we're talking sub 100 kilowatts, and help organisations start to propagate that in their own town, whether that's a community energy group or a progress association or a chamber of commerce. And then the third platform is to be able to help communities invest in solar farms or wind farms or other large generation and storage assets. And so, for instance, I'm well aware of the great work that's being done in the Healesville area for solar farms on landfill, and it will be potential that people will be able to help invest in that. But the focus is much more on this sort of large-scale investment, let's say upwards of 20 megawatts. And I won't spend any time on it, but this last feature, and Tri and Mondo are still very much at the start of their journeys with this. But electric vehicles are a remarkable example of distributed energy resources, and one that the energy market in Australia is still very much coming to terms with. And let's say the Nissan Leaf there that's pictured has 60 kilowatts of storage, whereas the average one-person household in Victoria has, they only use, I can't remember the number, but somewhere in the realm of 10 kilowatt hours a day. So you've got a massive storage system and a massive extra demand on the grid. And there's a real question about how do we use those electric cars, A, to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels to drive petrol and diesel vehicles, but B, get really smart about using the spare electricity to charge the vehicles, and really smart about using those vehicles to power back to our homes when there's no available renewable energy generation. So really exciting times ahead, and I guess I'm really thrilled in Healesville that you guys already have many of the elements that are going to be making up this remarkable transition to distributed energy resources. So hats off to the entire Healesville Community Energy Group, and of course, therefore the Healesville residents and businesses, and obviously the big role that the Shire of Yarra Ranges has played. So I'm going to finish off there, Jeff. So I'm going to throw back to you, and happy to answer questions.